I recently read, I've read all of the Jim Butcher Dresden Files books, and I read the most recent one just a few weeks ago. And there is a paragraph in the middle of one of a major escape scene. He's about to be killed in terrible ways. He wrote one paragraph that said, this is what I plan to do. This is why it's not going to work. This is why that guy out there scares me a lot. This is why there are various other things that can happen. What on earth am I going to do? I've got to do it right now. And he does something that he didn't even tell you about, but he got every bit of that tension-building information in one paragraph. And here's a trick that I learned from that paragraph. I have always been told, when you want to write suspense, if you have a scene that needs to, it's a big action scene, it needs to move quickly, write short sentences. Don't write short sentences. A period stops the reading. What Jim Butcher does, he'll have a paragraph that's about 3 sentences, 3 long sentences connected by commas. Little phrases connected by commas. And you just keep reading. I found that astonishing.
One of the things that I found that I really loved is someone said, remember, if you're info dumping about a situation or an event, remember that as with real life, people view it differently. So in my book there is some discussions about, the past events as they're trying to inform the new people of the past. But depending on who they're speaking to in the book, it's a completely different point of view. It's all the same events, but there are variations in the story because everyone's going to experience it differently. If you data dump some history that is the same across the board to every single person, it's going to lose realism because that assumes that everyone read the same history book and feels the exact same way about it. There may be someone who goes, this was a great and crucial point because this benefited all of us. And the next person's going to go, that was a travesty and it completely destroyed our society. So realize when your info dumps may need to be tailored to who is speaking.
That's an excellent point.
Well, Isaac Asimov also said, the info dump is the equivalent of saying, well, I suffered from my art, now you have to also. I've been identified in criticisms and reviews as a Texas author, which is funny because I grew up in Massachusetts. I've lived in Texas 30 years. But one of the things I realized, referring to what you just said, is that since I'm not a native Texan, I know when I can state, what has to be stated and what has to be explained, because like a lot of Texans know, you could write a book if it was a Texas history book and you said to someone, after that I drew the black bean. Every Texan knows what that means. Nobody outside Texas does. It refers to a massacre where they literally decimated a party of captured filibusters, and every 10th man was killed. They put a pot of beans. And if you drew the black bean, you were the one that was shot. There's still some people in Texas whose ancestors drew a white bean and they still have the bean on silk on a box. That's how their ancestors survived. But if you use that in a story, you got to explain it because nobody else. Yeah. Now you can tell about the Alamo. Everybody knows what happened at the Alamo. Yeah. But that helps me. So when I write in these Texas settings, it's easier to understand because I know what to explain and what I already knew about Texas, and it wouldn't need any explication. Sometimes that's partially cultural too. But for better or for worse, a lot of science fiction is based in U.S., UK. We have a lot of cultural similarities. I've even seen differences in stuff about Russian literature. It's like one of the things I learned about, I don't know that they're the same, but in the old days in the Soviet Union, if you picked up an item off a shelf to read the label, you were arrested for shoplifting. The Russians assumed if you could get your hands on something, you would steal it. So like an American going in Russia who knew how to read Russian, picked up a jar of jam because he wanted to see the ingredients, he was arrested for shoplifting. That's one of the reasons it was so cumbersome to shop in the old days in Russia. You had to pay for your items and then pick them up. You couldn't put stuff in a basket. They assume culturally, if you can get your hands on it, you'll steal it. And if you're writing a story in that setting, you have to explain that kind of cynical outlook. What's that Russian saying? 2 people can keep a secret if one is dead.
Yeah.
Yeah, you heard that.
Yeah, I've had international readers that'll write me and ask what a BLT is, or ask why is chili a comfort food. So I've had to explain to people, you know, the importance of a good homemade chili when you've been exiled for 15 years. Because to us, we know comfort food. Other places, they're like, I don't get it. What's chili? Why does that matter?
Well, in some places,
Chili.
any food
Yeah.
is comfort food, unfortunately.
Yeah.
My mother was in Italy at the end of the Second World War. She was a 14-year-old girl. And you don't, people were afraid in Europe they were going to starve because of the disruption of the local economy. That's when care packages started. CARE actually says Committee for American Relief to Europe. And my mother was afraid she was going to starve that winter. Now she didn't. She's 84 now. And she still always keeps bowls of snack foods out. She does not feel secure unless she can see popcorn, pretzels, potato chips. She always has to have some foods that she can reach and grab it. Which worked out really great when she came to visit me recently because I have 3 dogs. And I tell you, you do not leave a bowl of pretzels around a yellow Labrador. My mom thought she came down with Alzheimer's because the food kept disappearing. And my Labrador was like, well, Grandma, come back.
Okay, what makes a story readable? What is the thing what are some things that make a story easy to read, easy to pick up, easy to stay in?
Well, actually, we've covered a lot of it. Of course, the character has to go through a character arc. If a character goes in the story and doesn't change by the end of the story some way, it's boring. The change doesn't have to be super dramatic. Sometimes the biggest changes can be not visible to outsiders, but revealed to the reader. A change in attitude. Sometimes just good writing will propel, like you say, Jim Butcher, propels the story along. You start at the beginning, especially if you're dealing in the short fiction. Somebody like you write a story, and here's a good example. Daily science fiction is a good venue for new fiction, and daily science fiction story is only 1,500 words long. So if you're going to read the daily science fiction story of the day, it's going to be a good story, and it's 1,500 words long. So you're not, if by any chance it's a misfire, you didn't waste time doing it. And you could just, be propelled along. And hopefully, if the editor was perspicacious and the author was competent, you will get to the end and go, okay, that was worth it. I enjoyed that. I'll do that again. Otherwise, some people like particular genres. Of course, some people like military science fiction. Some people like sociological science fiction. Of course, some people like fantasy. Some people like urban fantasy. Some people like alternate history. I was nominated for the Sidewise Award once. I started writing alternate histories accidentally, but then I realized that, there's the old saying, journalism is the first rough draft of history. So, for me, I do this, and then I have trouble remembering, okay, when was Kennedy assassinated? Was he? No, yes, he was. There was no doubt. It's like, you forget the real history. When was Pearl Harbor? Shit, I wrote that story. I forgot what Pearl Harbor was. I can't remember which is real,
I think for me, it's finding the nuggets of relatability that you can put into your characters, because especially with working in urban fantasy, how well can any of us relate to a shapeshifter?